Hello everyone, my name is Nataliya Tchermalykh. I'm from the University of Geneva and this is called A Mask of One's Own. In this paper I intend to use an anthropological lens to analyze the burst in artistic creativity expanding around hygienic masks in the times of COVID-19. Since the beginning of 2020, the world has witnessed an almost dizzying ascendance of masks as indispensable and also inescapable objects of the everyday at a global scale. Theoretically, I'm interested in the symbolic polyvalence of masks as hygienic, aesthetic, sartorial, and identitarian objects. My reflection is based on ethnographic accounts of mask making by female artists of Japanese, Canadian, Finnish, and Ukrainian origins, whom I was interviewing between October 2020 and February 2021. As an anthropologist of art, I strongly believe that artists may productively inform us about new experimental ways of theorizing masks. They may provide us new visual but also theoretical and conceptual tools to understand the interconnected processes of mask making and face covering as they are practiced today in different parts of the world. This framework is one example of how the knowledge of artists who encounter masks on a daily basis can inform anthropologists about their social meanings and functions, not only in the artistic or aesthetic realm, but also more universally. After having systematized the thematics mentioned by my interlocutors, I thought that their mask-related practices may be positioned somewhere at the intersection of two axes. But of course, there might be even more dimensions. The first horizontal one is the identity community axis. On one extreme of it, one can position the mask for strict individual use, reflecting or concealing the identity of its wearer, to the mask crafted and designed to protect or represent, or maybe both, a community of human subjects. The second vertical one is the object performance axis that translates the ambivalence of the mask. Mask is simultaneously a static or purely aesthetic object stored in a museum collection or displayed on a wall, and an animated object associated with a public performance of one's agency, individual or collective. These axes are especially helpful for tracing the dynamic trajectory of the mask during and after the pandemic, and for grasping its changing and expanding agency. As I said previously, masks are polyvalent objects, which mean they can easily move from one semiotic extremum to another. I propose now to keep in mind this reference frame in what will be regrettably a too brief presentation of my mask makers, who are also mask thinkers, and their artistic universes reported most of the time in their own words. These masks attracted my attention immediately because these objects seemed to bear the deep traces of humanness. First, I discovered a multitude of ever-changing faces that seemed to have a life of their own and yet to belong and to faithfully reproduce the face of their maker, Turnbull. She describes her masks as three-dimensional self-portraits, a combination of sculpture, photography and collage. I use layers in my masks to represent all the complexities that make up our identity, says Mia. These are connected to the history of her family, that is of Japanese origin. Mia doesn't speak Japanese but has been studying traditional Japanese crafts. These are all ways I reconnect with my Japanese ancestry. I'm seeking out this connection to my mother's culture, which has suffered a disconnect and severing due to her experiences growing up in Canada after Second World War. To describe her enigmatic creations, Mia compares them to windows into the unseen or unknown. She says, I use the inside concave space of the masks to represent our inner world or subconscious. I call these inside-out masks. Each mask she makes is a new variation created by dissecting, distorting, and reconstructing her own image. This gesture of cutting and reconstructing one's face can be also found in the series woven. And the mask wasn't fixed into place. Once I began wearing it, it started falling apart, which seemed representative of how I have been feeling during the pandemic, trying to hold it all together. In spring 2020, when North America experienced a shortage in hygienic masks, Mia didn't hesitate to make fabric masks, giving them out to anyone in her community for free or by donation to the Black Lives Matter Solidarity Fund. They also had traditional Japanese inspirations. Soon this new format found a place in her artwork. I began making paper COVID masks, a cross between these fabric masks and my photo-based work. The results were very humorous and strange. The fabric masks inspired more papier-mâché half masks of an artistic kind, with her nose and lips on them. If placed on my framework, one could say that the mask that used to be an aesthetic object connecting the past to the present and used as a tool to explore one's transgenerational kinship, during 2020 gradually opened itself to the community. Mia has also started doing more video performances that she presents exclusively online. Namu Rauhala, 36, Finland, also recalled the first month of lockdown as a time that enhanced her creativity. She says, "The pandemic affected my artistic work a lot. I had more time because I could work from home. Usually it takes me 3 hours a day to commute to work and not see anyone. At the beginning of 2020, I was making in disguise a series of small papier-mâché mask sculptures with human faces. After the lockdown started, I shifted to masks. The first zoanthropomorphic creature that emerged in spring 2020 was what Mamu calls my lockdown chicken, my alter ego. It's an image of half woman, half chicken looking out from the window. Telling the story of this, she recalled that she was trying to imagine the everyday of her aunts, who are both over 80. What is it really like when you have to be alone, locked down in your home? But with time, these images started to reflect my own feelings during that spring. Mia Turnbull has described her masks as windows into the unseen or unknown. Similarly, for Mamu Rauhala, her masks were conduits and tools to explore the unseen and unknown reality of the other, in her case of older family members living in isolation. This reality has gradually become that of younger women in this world that has become strange. In her pictures too, the animality at the extreme incarnation of the other becomes blended with the human self. It is interesting to see how her small self-portrait appears here, floating in her soup eaten by the chicken. When asked if this has a particular meaning, Mamu said that these images are rather products of improvisation and combination of objects that she sees around her and of her own body. It is a semi-conscious, surrealistic and ironic practice that makes visible the invisible and disguises it with elements of ironic absurdity. During the spring and summer 2020, Mamu started making masks representing different body parts, such as the eyes, the ears, the uterus, the breasts, or the vagina, and putting them on her face. This practice recalled the definition of the grotesque body, initially proposed by Mikhail Bakhtin in the 20s in his analysis of the pagan carnival and its relics in European culture. Later, this definition was elaborated by the feminist cultural critics in the 80s and enriched with gendered meanings. According to their model, the grotesque body is the one that refuses to keep each part in its place, as opposed to the classical body that is transcendent, monumental, closed, static, self-contained, symmetrical, and sleek. The images of the grotesque body are precisely those which are ejected from the bodily canons of classical aesthetics. One example of such a carnivalesque inversion is Mamu's fish with a nude female body that is a sort of anti-mermaid or of an inverted mermaid, to the contrary of the classical mermaid that doesn't have the human lower bodily parts. Mamu's inverted mermaid can walk and procreate. According to Bakhtin's vision, the carnivalesque body is not separated from the rest of the world. It is blended with the world, with animals, with objects. End of the quote. An example of such a blending are Mamu's masks with small animals that used to be her child's toys. With them, she created this beautiful mask called Childhood Helmet to the left, or another one called Silver Lining to the right, that is in the shape of a cloud, which she wears when she feels like blending with the serenity of the Baltic landscape. These sets of masks, each presenting artistic works by one Ukrainian artist, have been created and curated by Olga Malikava from Kiev, Ukraine. When I was living in Kiev, I was always amazed by Luba's capacity to, quite literally, bring the feast, the carnival, and art to the city. Who could not notice her walking down the street? 15 years later, things did not change, and Luba is still a sort of a magnet for the Kievan artistic community. With her friends and business partner Katya Katautka, Luba runs Disorder, a micro-brand of slow fashion. Yeah, Disorder it is. She loves looking at the camera at 9 p.m. when her children are asleep and we can finally talk. Luba is not a classical businesswoman. She is a single mother of two and gave an assisted home birth to her younger daughter Aya during the lockdown. This was her choice. Her son, who is 6, is homeschooled. This was also a matter of her choice. Luba's humorous stories related to her mothering experiences received hundreds of likes and shares on Facebook. Her interest in masks as purely sartorial objects, not yet related to the pandemic, goes back to 2015 and her first trip to China, where she saw people wearing masks outside on a daily basis. In recent years, central Ukraine suffers more and more from wood fires. In 2019, forests around Chernobyl were burning for several days, making air-filtering masks an absolute necessity for life in Kyiv. At that time already, Lyuba was wearing a mask every day, enjoying its privacy. In spring 2020, quite naturally, she asked all of her favorite artists to create designs for a series of protective masks that she makes and sells. The meaning of the images often goes beyond pure aesthetics. For example, these come from a series by Vladimir Rulko, who is a Ukrainian painter. This series is called Lines of Demarcation. Rulko's watercolor sketches were imminent reactions to war in eastern Ukraine and to the occupation of Crimea. Rulko says that her images coming from the series express the uncanny mythology of war and peace, the strange feeling produced by a distant and yet everlasting military conflict. Other subjects that find their places on the masks are the memory of the Jewish genocide in Masks by Nikita Kadan, or, as on the masks by David Chichkan, the forgotten verses by the Ukrainian 19th century poets who considered themselves socialists and anarchists but are now integrated into the Ukrainian nationalist canon. Having a look at Lyuba's catalogue of hygienic masks, one can get a deep and quite unique understanding of the community of Ukrainian artists and their subjects. One can almost say that Lyuba's project is a metaphor of the Ukrainian artistic community functioning professionally but also socially and economically as a heterogeneous social body, a body that needs its mask. As everywhere in the world, during the pandemic, Ukrainian artists did not necessarily have access to spaces of exhibitions. In her interview, Lyuba told me that she feels joy and fulfillment when she sees her mask on someone in the street. Her project, that by the way did not have any ambition besides providing protection from the virus, launches a playful circulation of artistic images in the urban landscape and functions as an interesting marker of a particular aesthetic community. On the webpage of the New York MoMA, I have found masks of Yoko Ono's design that one can order online and help raise funds for WHO. More than aesthetic or hygienic, these masks are philanthropic objects that help to channel financial flows from one economy to another. In Kyiv, a similar process happens on a much smaller local scale. The profits of these masks go to Lyuba, the mother of Yakub and Aya. During the pandemic, Luba's assessment of her business seems counterintuitive. After I gave birth to Aya, my brand resuscitated. Predictably, the sales of masks has gone up, so she can now even afford a helper 3 times a week for several hours. If they were to be placed on my reference framework, Luba's mask would definitely occupy the upper right corner where performance and community intersect. Today, public face covering came to symbolize loyalty to the new social and biological order. More than anything, this order is based on the imperative to take into serious consideration the reality of the virus, located in the realm of the invisible, the unknown, and the beyond human. This latter statement might sound strangely familiar to anthropologists. It is ironic that the masks brought to the foreground in 2020 were used for ritualistic purposes precisely to co-opt the invisible and the unknown. The process of mask making and mask wearing for carnival purposes was one of the ways to creatively overcome the isolation of winter months in the northern regions of Europe. However, historically, ritualistic mask wearing was often taboo for women. During winter carnivals in Europe, women were often excluded from the groups of mask wearers, or frightened chased at in the Swiss carnival in the Loschental, or even raped by them. In modern times, however, masks as epidemiological objects have been mostly crafted by women. In 2021, the process of mask making seems to still be explored mostly with feminine hands, but so is more and more the process of meaning making around them. As my interlocutors suggest, after 2019, masks became sites for aesthetic and semiotic experimentation with different facets of femininity and gendered aspects of work. I argue that mask making and face wearing for artistic purposes sheds light on the inversion of traditionally distributed gender roles and allows women to overcome isolation through feminist carnivalesque that is often performed online with use of digital technologies and social media. The global lockdown normalized and destigmatized the working from home condition also for women artists. From an almost exclusively feminine condition, isolation has become a global one. At the same time, the center of artistic life shifted, moving away from prestigious spaces to the screens in virtual spaces, the social media. The official art world was quite surprised to find itself at the periphery of global governance. Some spaces have not reopened or opened only sporadically since March 2020. What is important to emphasize is that some of those who have been in disadvantageous positions, like self-employed women, women owners of small businesses, working from home, mothers of small children, etc., reported that their situation has even a bit improved. One of the reasons for it is that they were previously suffering more from invisibilization and lack of access to markets rather than from the economic crisis provoked by the pandemic. The COVID-related isolation was empowering, at least maybe during the first wave, and sometimes even financially profitable. This might be due to the reconfiguration of the art market and the inversion of the hierarchies, as well as the emergence of new infrastructures of attention and new financial flows. On the 31st December 2020, Mamu Rauhala created a patchwork of 9 images of her works that she considered the best in 2020. To this post, she added an optimistic message. For me, this weird year also brought something good, new friends and opportunities for cooperation from all over this shared globe. Thank you to each of you for your support, friendship and discussions. Happy New Year! Immediately after, one of her followers, who is in her profile describes herself as artist, homeschool mom, cook, commented, referring to Mamu's cloud-shaped work called Silver Lining. New art and new friends, the silver lining in the COVID cloud. Here is to 2021. So let me finish on a light note. Here's to all the creative women, artists and mask makers who have been inspired during this pandemic to make some new masks of their own. Thank you.